Welcome everyone. My name is Angelique Lentjes. Welcome to the webinar hosted by the TU Delft Extension School for Continuing Education as part of the Delta Week events, leading up to the celebration of our university's 182nd Dies Natalis. I would like to give the floor to Leon, who will introduce himself, our speakers, and the topic of the session today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Angelique, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Leon Hermans. I'm an associate professor in water and environmental policy analysis at Delft University of Technology and also at IHE Delft. And I'm really excited that we can spend the coming hour with each other to exchange ideas and talk about strategic planning and redesigning deltas, especially interdisciplinary approaches for doing so. What we will do in this 1 hour webinar, I'll give you a short introduction to the topic and how we sort of decided for the topics we would like to discuss with you in this webinar. But then we'll give the floor to our speakers, who I will introduce to you during the presentations, even including the introduction. Please feel free to type any questions or comments or thoughts that you would like to share in the chat. That will enable me to see them and to raise them to our speakers for you. We will do the discussion at the end of the presentation so that we can also hear combined views from both Floortje and Holong Phi. But please feel free to type your comments and questions all throughout the webinar. And also, please be aware that we are recording this webinar, so that you are aware of this. But then to move a bit to the topic of the webinar of strategic planning and redesigning deltas. Yeah, why do I think that is such an interesting topic? Well, it's because deltas are complex systems, and that means that we cannot design a delta like we can maybe design some other engineering or technological artifacts. It also means that master planning in a delta is something different than maybe we're traditionally used to. But at the same time, of course, planning and design are still possible and are very important for deltas. And we have seen various new approaches emerging in the past few years. And what I think is an important aspect in many of these approaches is that they pay much more attention and make much more use of systems thinking, but also pay much more attention to the roles that stakeholders or actors play in delta planning. So that is also what we decided to focus on in this webinar today. And of course, if you think about stakeholders or actors and systems, then I think nowadays the consensus is with most of the experts in the water and delta domains that, hey, we would want to have an open dialogue, an inclusive process, and take into account the needs and the positions and the possibilities of all critical actors in our delta plans. And we also should pay attention and integrate as much as possible all the relevant dimensions of these complex delta systems, meaning that it should be cross-sectoral, but also multi-level. And that is, of course, an ideal that we talk a lot about and that we hear a lot. And I think many of us agree with that. I certainly do. But at the same time, in practice, of course, integrating everything and including everyone is not possible. How would you do that, right? So instead, I think what we try to do is make sure we have the most important elements included in our delta planning and design processes and products. But then that still leaves a lot of interesting questions at the table, I think. How do we decide who are the most important stakeholders? And that may also differ, of course, from one delta to another. It may matter if we are working on a design for a more resilient Mekong Delta, or for the Nile Basin Delta, for the Yala River Delta in Kenya that ends up in Lake Victoria, or for the Rhine-Meuse Delta in the Netherlands. So which stakeholders should be included? Who are the most important ones? How should we include it? But also, what kind of stakeholder considerations do we need to take into account in making and implementing Delta plans? And of course, these stakeholders change over time. And something similar applies to system aspects. What are the most important system aspects? What are the boundaries for planning, making Delta plans? Is that maybe the urban port area that at the end of the Delta? Is that including the hinterland? Is that also even including transboundary aspects or adjacent river basin deltas? And how then do we still make sure all of this is connected, if not integrated, at least not in contradiction with each other? And how do we link these actors and these systems? Because of course, here we present them a little bit as different things, but as I think we will hear in the presentations by Fie and by Floortje, they are in fact almost impossible to separate. So they are connected and they need to be connected. And then on top of that, of course, we are planning under exciting new developments, both desired developments maybe and sometimes undesired developments. And we see new opportunities arising, new technologies, especially maybe much more nature-based solutions, but then combined with more traditional hard infrastructure solutions, different financing options. All of this is still partly at least uncharted waters. And the only thing we do know about interventions in complex systems is that they always will come with surprises and with unintended side effects. So that makes it really interesting, I think, to talk about how do we deal with stakeholder aspects and how do we make good use of systems thinking approaches for redesigning deltas. And I'm very happy that we have found two experts on these topics to tell us a bit more about their ideas about this today. We will start with a presentation by Dr. Ho Long Phi, who is a senior consultant and vice managing director at Entity, which is a consultancy company based in Asia with offices in Singapore, Vietnam, and I think in Indonesia. But Dr. Phi has actually a very rich career spanning different fields of work and different also places of work. So in the past, for instance, he has been also the director of the Center of Water Management and Climate Change and a professor at Ho Chi Minh City National University, or sorry, Vietnam National University, but also before that played an important role in flood control and advising on climate change for Vietnam and for Ho Chi Minh City. Dr. Phi will talk to us about stakeholder dynamics that are especially important for long-term Delta plans. And then after Dr. Phi, Dr. Floortje de Hond will present. And Floortje is a colleague of mine at the policy analysis section at TU Delft. So she is also a policy analyst with a particular interest in the role of systems thinking for generating innovative and creative solutions for wicked problems. And also very interesting is that she has taught and developed courses, also online courses on, for instance, Room for the River, perspectives on river basin management, but also recently with colleagues published a book on complex coastal systems, transdisciplinary learning on international case studies that I think offers interesting insights, and I hope we will hear at least a bit about those in her presentation. And I think with that, I have introduced what I wanted to introduce, and I would like to invite Dr. Phi to start his presentation.
Thank you, Leon. So what I'm talking is mostly based on my experience of many years on the consultancy, advisory, and education. I see a lot of lessons, a lot of trial and error, a lot of unanswered questions, and I try to develop a framework to explain the things. And today I want to share with you. So you may wonder a lot of questions in your mind. Why startup fail or project delay or plan very well, plan not implemented at all, or even bigger a problem like how come the populism or nationalism rise, or democracy does not always prevent social conflict. So you can see the very different thing that seem to be far away from each other, but according to my observation, they may share, of course, beside their own problem, their own factor, they may share the same root, the stakeholder cooperation. So I'm starting with the MOTA framework that can help explain what happened of the process of planning. Usually, it's can start with a trigger. It could be social, economic, environmental, physical, political, military, and so on. A lot of kinds of trigger. The trigger can make loss or gain in financial aspect, technical, institutional, social, economic, and so on. And I call all of them, I classify as the ability of a stakeholder. And then, as a result of both emotional and reasoning, we come to a strong perception, that's strong enough of perception of opportunity or threat. And that if the perception is strong enough, so we may have motivation to do something. And that motivation, it could be negative, that means oppose, or positive, support. And passive, okay, let someone have to do it, or active, we have to do it. It depends on the status of your perception and your ability. And then when motivation and ability come together, so we go to action. So the action planning is the very crucial step of any planning. At the time, we have to decide what, when, who, where, how to do the thing, and to make it happen. And then that result in implementation, and also, of course, impact. The impact may relax the original trigger somehow, and we call it the collective impact. So this part, the original framework MOTA that we published back in 2015. But then after that, I don't think that's enough, because this framework can be applied for a project, for a limited scale plan with a limited time. But for the long-term strategic planning, the very important factor that impact on individuals or on each stakeholders, because the impact may not be the same for all stakeholders relevant in this implementation. You can see the three factors may change along the course: trigger change, ability change, and motivation change. And of course, next action, next step of the roadmap also change. to create another impact, and so on. That's a look of what I call dynamic MOTA. So now you know MOTA is the abbreviation of motivation and ability. That's the two important factors of any action to happen. So that's the basic of the framework. And you can see the MOTA framework can have improved maturity of policy or plan, or to identification the priority in action plan, or even try to estimate the sustainability of an implemented policy or plan. So we come to the crucial part of the precision is the stakeholder. So according to our framework, so the classification is included 4 main group of actors: T actor, A actor, S actor, and B actor. So the T actor mostly the experts, and their ability mostly tool, data, method, calculation, whatsoever. And motivation always best performance cost. And they mostly don't care about about the side effect. I call it T-motor. And for A actor, so their ability also defined by legitimate power, and their motivation also different from the T-motor. And S motor, the ability and motivation of the community, of the mass population. And what they have is just the power of the mass. But motivation, they just focus on their mostly personal interest and private sector. That be motor. So actually, one actor can combine some of them, some of this ability, but it's not typical. Just one is typical for their class. And depending on the plan policy and stage, there will be one lead stakeholder or one stakeholder group that the most important actor will be there to make the action happen. But because of their limited ability, they have to establish a correlation with all relevant stakeholder with the other to gain the complementary ability that he needs, and also to reduce confrontation. Here are some example that the real real case study we did in the Mekong Delta about 10 years ago. Or you can see the S group, B group, T group, and A group. And the one had the high motivation, also high ability, is this group. So they are lead stakeholder. But the rest still have another situation. So they may think different. Yeah. And our design, our planning that have to make the transition from the lower part to the highest part. Try to move the stakeholder to the highest position. The high. And we can do it by consent building or capacity building mostly. So you can see in the case it's not not all capacity building can be useful. Sometimes consent building is much more important. Yeah, so with the framework, we can customize in capacity building and consent building package so that we can improve the maturity of a plan to be implemented. So the package should be adaptive to new situation, because the positions of this group can be changed over time. Here's the an example of complementary ability example. You can see the Mekong River Basin. Upstream is a lot of dam cascade have been built in China, in Laos, in Cambodia, but the victim is Vietnam, Mekong Delta. And how can we deal with it? So far, usually they can use the institutional tool, try to make a deal of transboundary water issue, but no use, because after decades of negotiation, no result at all. Why? Because, you know, there's a different motivation and ability from upstream country and downstream country. And Vietnam Mekong Delta has no play a good card to play in this negotiation. And what they have to do is to strengthen their motor. And look at that, the watershed resource planning for the Mekong Delta Basin for the dominant actor upstream is mostly A and B. That means the authority and private sector. And that make conflict and confrontation among country and community. So therefore, the downstream country had to build up T, B, and S motor, because so far they just use the A motor to deal with the upstream motor, and that's not strong enough. So what we have to focus in is not continue this one, but try to strengthen this one. For example, if we manage to make a resumption of water-related livelihood of downstream community for the people in the Mekong Delta, so I think that's very good leverage to deal in the transboundary negotiation. So in the example, I can give you the how to identify the actor missing. For example, in the climate change adaptation policy. So so far, the lead group actor is scientists and government with some effort. But most S and B actors still outside, because, for example, the direct and current loss of some social group and low B and S motor may drive resistance and populism. For example, the oil-related industry job or combustion car industry, for example. So they try to apply some incentive for EV, but still billion people still left behind. And you can see in the picture on the on the right, we're talking about climate change. They just show it a very a rich city with the prosperous landscape, but in fact, what we have to do is strengthen the S motor. We have to share the benefit of adaptation policy. Like more climate funding should go directly to people in poverty, not go to incentive for the people who effort to buy an electric car, for example. And here you can see the stakeholder correlation dynamic. started from the left side, the trigger now is the water scarcity. And the two options could be available, reservoir or reduce runoff by forestation. And then the stakeholder A, who support the reservoir idea, may form a stakeholder A1 to build a dam. And then the farmer who get the water for the irrigation, that multi-gain as A2. And then develop further to stakeholder A3 with the whole agro-business complex. But for the option B, reservoir could be replaced by forestation to reduce runoff and to keep it in the basin. And then the solution is forestation, not build a dam. Because when you build a dam, the migration may happen because we have to relocate some people, some native people within the reservoir into another place, and then deforestation also. And then that might form not the stakeholders, segment C, with the social and environmental activists or green politicians. And then the results of both conflict is the social polarity. And then that's the trigger tool for another planning, another phase of planning. So just started from a very simple one, now we come to a bigger one. But the very big question is okay, we have the very good strategic vision.
I'd like to inform you that the 15 minutes are gone. So please feel free to finish, but also mind the time a little bit if you.
Okay, I need just 1 more minute. Okay, we have to transform from our long-term vision to the current context using action plan. Yeah. And how can we do it? We can using a conventional SWOT metric, but separated future and present. And then we have a lot of way to go. Yeah. And even with trade-off to go to the long-term vision. And I developed also another tool to analyze the action planning tool. We call it the IF, that means impact score and feasibility score. And you can see on the table. And with that, we can use it for the action prioritization, resource allocation, or to identify potential conflict or actor dynamic forecasting. I use for this analyze this Saigon-Dong River Delta and explain why this solution had been chosen. So conclusion, so you can see the dynamic motor can help explain and help you to design the action plan so that it can certify both the maturity and also feasibility of the roadmap. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Phil. It was very interesting, and sorry for cutting you short a little bit, but I think we have enough also food for thought and I think also for discussion. So I would also like to again invite our audience to type their comments or questions in the chat in the meantime, while we continue listening to Floortje with a presentation on in which systems thinking is a bit more central. So Floortje, the floor is yours.
Let me see. Are you seeing the slideshow?
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Okay, good. We practiced, but it's no different than
it would
we practiced. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Floortje. Thanks, Leon, for inviting me. Leon asked me to talk about systems thinking and redesigning deltas, and I thought, oh, that's easy. I just don't have to talk about actors. And I found out in that interesting exercise for myself that I can't decouple systems perspectives from actor perspectives. And I hope that after this presentation, you know why. So why we see these two system perspectives and actor perspective as so complementary. Leon already mentioned it, but I work at the policy analysis section at the faculty of TPM, so Technology, Policy and Management. And everyone in our faculty is in some way, I think, concerned with how humans interact with technology or infrastructure or the environment. And policy analysis is a relatively small field. I'm not going too deep into what it is, but it might be nice for you to realize that I see it as a rational, systematic way to support policy-making processes. So whatever activity you do that in the end will result in a better policy advice or maybe even a better decision can be constructed as policy analysis. And policy analysis is usually a sequence of steps depending on who you're asking. In this figure, there's a few definitions, but all of them start with, okay, what is that problem? What is the system that problem exists in? What do I actually want? So what are my objectives? What do I need to change? And then you find alternatives, you weigh them, compare them, and based on your analysis, you decide which one is the best one and you give advice on that, for example. And what struck me when I was starting out my research is that all these sequences of steps, they say, oh, well, compare these alternatives. But no one really went into where do these alternatives come from? So who is designing here and why? And are we not, why are we not shedding light as policy analysis on this design phase? And can we do that in a different way, or can it bring us something? So I started out years ago with a PhD. I wanted to co-design in coastal systems, so with people, and I built it on, anchored it on systems thinking. Meaning, first I earlier in my research, I tried to understand what the system was and how things are interlinked. I'll tell a bit about that later, how you do that. And then I figured, okay, well, in these models, these system models that I make assumptions. And can I not use expertise of others, of other researchers, or maybe expertise of people actually living in such a coastal system? Can I use that to enrich my own system understanding? And another step further is, can we then design together and find different solutions? So that this was all, these were the questions I was struggling with, and maybe still am still struggling with. First of all, what is a system, right? But what are we talking about when we talk about systems? And again, you can find many definitions, but know that systems are constructed and they are a part of reality that is being studied as a result of their existence or suspicion of a problem. So problems and systems are somewhat related. Systems are built from system elements and interconnections. There's also a system boundary, and whatever is outside the system boundary is not in our system. And because they're constructed, because we make them, we get to choose what those boundaries are and what we include in our analysis and what we exclude. What is the environment that influences that system? And so that's systems and complex systems. Leon already mentioned that we study complex systems. Complex systems are the systems that are so complex that you can't understand the behavior of the overall system, even if you would know all the parts together. So those complex systems behave in a different and more unpredictable way. So really interesting, right? And because you have a choice as whoever you are, if you're a project manager or if you have a project and you have a complex delta system, for example, you get to choose what you analyze in that system. And I chose, I'm looking at social ecological systems. So I look at systems in which I look at the biogeophysical environment, the natural system. So if I was actually interested in coastal system, but you can also think of similarly, you can think of delta systems in which water and nature, the physical part of the systems are important, but also humans. So humans interact with that environment, and you can think of interventions in that space would be technologies or dikes or infrastructure, but the physical environment also responds back to the human system. So maybe this is vague. Maybe you think, oh, this is a very broad definition of what such a complex system is. And that was more or less the intention. I kind of want to load, okay, what are we looking at here for coasts and deltas? And you can imagine that because we get to construct these systems ourselves, you have different system perspectives. So if you have a little small coastal issue, for example, here, erosion on Texel Island, the first barrier island in the Netherlands, then your system, your scope, your geographical scope is much smaller than if you look at another problem, such as the high water a few weeks ago. This is from the Dutch national news, and you see where the water was high or extremely high. If this looks a lot wider, broader, the system perspective here, but still you see that the Dutch news took the perspective of the Netherlands. So we all know that the Rhine doesn't start here, it starts somewhere in the Alps, but we didn't consider that. So there's always something outside your system and something in, and you get to choose. Similarly to those spatial skills that we use, we can also consider interests. Are we looking at only flood risk? If you looked at the news the last few weeks, it was a lot about high water flood risk, but also about nature. And we heard foresters say, hey, so those high water managed floods was actually quite beneficial, a blessing for nature, because it will increase biodiversity in the long term, because this part of nature gets more water than they initially expected. And in addition to that, you can think of other aspects that you can make your system, define your system in, jurisdictional levels, temporal scales. Certain people look, for instance, engineers, they build a dike to last 100 years. But an agricultural, someone who lives in a coastal zone might think of the seasons or of decades. So there's difference there. Same goes for governance layers. So there's European level, the national level, regional level, and all these perspectives and things you can choose, but also add some complexity to that system that you're analyzing. And the question now for me was, okay, does that then affect design? Is the system that we define in the beginning, how does that affect solutions we find for the problem later on? And the line of thinking here is, if I stereotype it, similar to if you would think, okay, an engineer who really designs for safety, like their primary objective is flood safety or flood risk prevention, then you can imagine that they would design a very high concrete dike or wall. And that's, but if you would design for also nature, you can think of more dynamic solutions such as sediment. Similarly, we saw this shift in the 20th century in the Netherlands in water management, where first flood prevention was much more important, and later stakeholder interests and also nature, nature conservation became more and more important and was valued differently by society even. I just want to say that if you're interested in how these perspectives can alter design, there's a few MOOCs that I know of that in which you practice that. So you get to design a particular problem and then see how it changes if you do it according to different design principles. There must be more, but I know of these. Maybe Leon can shed some light on that, or the TU Delft website later. Another example in which we see that perspectives can alter design is, for instance, in the Room for the River program. And this is a famous example in which you see here on the right hand the object of our interest. In the initial design, the designer said, okay, well, we need to move this agricultural person, this farmer, his company, because this part of the land should be able to be flooded by the river. So you need to move. And then there was a community-based initiative in which the farmer proposed, well, I can stay there. I can allow for the higher water. I will take that risk, and I built an elevated bit, which we in Dutch would call a terp, but a small land elevation here. And in case of high tide or extreme high water, I will go there and my cattle will go there, and that will only be a few times per decade. So that's fine with me. And you see there that the community perspective brought a new solution that the designers initially hadn't considered, because they had assumed that that person would not want to do that and want to move entirely. So the question, if you're then designing or trying to find solutions, is which knowledge do you include? And I'm framing it here in a transdisciplinary way, and that means that you use scientific knowledge, which we always use if we're looking at such complex delta systems, because there is so much expertise about, think of it like hydrologists, ecologists, biologists. They all know little bits about that delta system, governance experts. So you can imagine that you need that knowledge, and you know that it's somewhat scattered. So there is a whole process of who am I getting and what knowledge am I using. And on the other hand, there is a societal knowledge base. So actors and their interests are there. And we now know that the community can also bring knowledge and know things about their environment that maybe are said in a different language or in different formalism, but are still can contribute to getting a right solution or a good one. And you also, I saw this in a case study that I did for my PhD. So it was called Cocoa Channel project, because we like nice acronyms. It was a local erosion problem on Texel. If you would look at it purely for the law and for flood risk, then there was too much erosion that was allowed by law. And then you can do, if you look in a particular system perspective, which is somewhat narrow, you can think, okay, well, either we have to change the rules and the law, or we have to nourish more. And we did a whole participatory co-design process. And what we found there was that the willingness of the people living there and earning their livelihoods, in particularly some a beach pavilion, so people earning their money from tourism there, were actually willing to move if they were financially compensated. And then but that solution was then not considered before by the government authorities, because they had ideas about fairness and equality. If we give this person some money to move, should we then also give other people, other actors, money or similar compensation? So there was a whole assumption about values and equality that was but which didn't come up in earlier analysis. And in this research, I keep saying there were more solutions, and you can frame that as a solution space. And if you think that design is choosing, which I think it is, in a way, if you design something, you make choices. You make a set of coherent choices in a solution space. And if you can imagine it like this, if you have only one choice, like if it's the dike, medium or high, or what height is the dike, then you can make that as a one-dimensional space which is a line, right? And then you can slide and think of that choice. And if you have to make more choices, which you usually have to do, then you create a space, which a multi-dimensional space, which I had tried to draw like this on the slide. And as such, design or co-design is a way to identify trade-offs. If you do it participatory with each other, and you see, if you do that, then you will have to, the price of that is that there's this other thing. And if you, so you make trade-offs and you can identify trade-offs. If you would only ask them, would you like nature or would you like this? And they say, yeah, I want safety and I want nature and I want it cheaply. So those trade-offs really become clear in designing or designing together.
Floortje, similar to Fee, I'm
Yeah,
really enjoying your talk, but we are past the 15 minutes. So please finish, but
I'll finish.
also mind the time a bit. Yeah.
I'll finish. I skipped this slide in which I try to say how we try to compare different case studies around the world. I wanted to highlight an example from Ireland in which we also saw that if you include community stakeholders, they actually really wanted to be engaged, but they didn't know how to access the policy-making process, which I think is a nice example also from fees talks. How do you, even if they have the capability, how do they get access to policy-making space? And here the solution that they identified in the research was that the course of action should be bottom-up and community integrated. So the solution was in the social subsystem and not in the technical solution for a water management problem. This is my last slide. If you can remember one thing, think about, okay, systems are constructed. I construct systems. So what am I including in my initial analysis? And that will have effect on the solutions you'll find later on. That's enough for me today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Floortje. And I think I think we didn't mention, but I think it's very clear from your presentation, your introduction, but also this everything in between till this last slide that you actually not just work for TU Delft, but for the multi-actor systems department in TU Delft. So actors and systems are well connected. If you like, you can stop sharing your screen, Floortje. Then we have some time for discussion, for questions and answers. I haven't seen a huge number of questions yet in the chat, so I would once again want to invite everyone, if you have comments or questions, please type them in the chat. We have some 10 minutes to discuss, so I think there is some room to address some of your concerns if you have them. I found it really interesting to see that with your presentation, Floortje, we got into actually again also not just the systems but the stakeholders, and how actually working in systems thinking with stakeholders helps to shape the solution space, but also maybe broaden the set of alternatives. Whereas I think the approach that Fee was presenting on the dynamic MOTA is a bit more of an analytic approach to capture what is going on, and then based on that maybe also think about your interventions. So I think that's a nice complementary and different ways to look at fairly similar things. How do actors and systems in strategic delta planning play a role and influence each other? Maybe something you would want to reflect on. But first, I saw that there was one very clear request for Fee to if he could again show the action planning tool. Maybe Angelique can put that slide up, and then maybe I think it was Mr. Mathieu Ano. While Fee, maybe you explain a little bit what is on this slide, and while you do so, for me, please also add then how, I mean, have you used this already in practice, and if so, how, and how did others respond to this, like maybe stakeholders in government that you have worked with? Maybe you could add a bit on that while you tell us a little bit more about this action planning tool. Yeah. And that may also then allow Mr. Mathieu Ano to make his question a bit more precise and then type it in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Leon. So you can see on the table is a horizontal scale is the MOTA score. MOTA score is the product of motivation and ability. So it is based on survey. So we have to conduct a lot of survey, and especially the social survey. It's very big. For example, for the Mekong Delta, we did 1,000 questionnaire just to ask people some questions, just to understand their motivation and what they want and what they can, and what could be the complementary ability that they need, something like that. And also we have to for the provincial planning obtaining. So we talk with a lot of private sector, hundreds of them, to see what they want to be in part of this strategic planning, to be contribute to the vision. That's the MOTA score. But then again, MOTA score is not enough. I introduced another score that we call the impact score. The impact here could be negative or positive results of a specific action. If we do something, so the outcome may exert on some impact on relevant stakeholder, and impact is not be the same for all. And then with the scale, it's a very simple scale from -2 up to maximum 2, and here again -2, 2. So positive and negative. And if you calculated the product of this, so you can see the result. -2 2 is 4. And the same for every number in the table.
And Fee, do you have some results for using this method or the earlier versions of the MOTA method in Vietnam? That's another question that I also noticed on the chat that relates a little bit maybe to this slide that we're looking at.
Yeah, the MOTA score, we have to go back to the another slide to show you how to calculate the MOTA score. But I think that just calculation based on your scale set in questionnaire, but that require a lot of questionnaire to understand stakeholder. And the impact score, you have also loss and gain. So from loss and gain, you can determine the dynamic of actor. So they may leave the group, or the other one, another one may join the original group. So that dynamic can be explained by the impact factor. Because, yeah, and based on that, we can have three application. First, if you look at the bottom right corner, that give you some guide what you should do and what should be the priority. And if you look at the upper left corner, so you can see the opposite, don't and loss, because that the actor may be act, maybe maybe the counter actor, and then maybe there a potential confrontation.
Yeah, and I think maybe the question was also interested in fairly practical application, and I am aware of maybe not the newer evolution of the dynamic motor, but more the traditional motor being applied in studies to, I'm not sure, I don't recall the exact details of the studies, but commissioned by the World Bank, for instance, in the Vietnamese Mekong Delta, but also actually taken up by a research consultancy group from Australia working in the
Let me see.
basin. But I would like to move on in view of time, because I see we almost, our hour is finished. So Angelique, thank you for sharing the slides. And I would like to move to another question, which I also found quite intriguing, which is which is posed by Sidra Noor. Apologies for my pronunciation of your name, but about community perception, and whether this is now a one or a two-way issue, and how you deal with that, and maybe also how do you deal with the fact that maybe that communication about the perception is in a way, of course, never ending. And I was thinking maybe, Floortje, if you could reflect a bit on that.
Yeah, I think I'm reading also the question, how can we convince the community for moving out of the flood zone? And I think what I saw in those two examples I gave, but there are more examples, so the Ireland one and the Texel one, you see that that the resistance to moving is not as big as we would have initially thought. So local stakeholders, especially, we see this especially in for people who live in or near estuaries, delta, so they have contact with water, and they are quite aware of long-term risks and also willing to move. So I think that assumption that they're not is maybe too strict.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And actually, I see that the questions are quite numerous now, and some, I think, are actually also quite hard to answer. For some, we may be able to share a few pointers to some further information on both of your approaches and presentations. But with that, also looking at the clock, I think we have had a very rich 1 hour, and we are getting to a close. So so let me close by giving a really warm thanks and applause to Dr. Floortje and Dr. Fee for sharing their knowledge with us, your views, and while doing so, also learning things yourselves. That is, I think, always the best way. And to thank the audience for joining, for participating, for your comments and questions, and also I saw in the chat for actually also answering each other's questions. That is even the most useful. So I'm really happy to see that this was a quite interactive webinar this way. The webinar is hosted by the TU Delft Extension School for Continuing Education. And at the end of this webinar, I would like to to bring your attention to the fact that actually at TU Delft there is a large range of online courses on various topics, but definitely also including the topic of today's webinar and of this Dies Natalis week of TU Delft on redesigning deltas. Floortje already, I think, mentioned them also, but the QR code on this slide and the link here should enable you to see the collection of courses that is most directly relevant for the topics we have been discussing here. And one specific small program in this portfolio is actually directly on the topic we were discussing here: systems and actor approaches for water and strategy planning. And that's also a program that is being offered, and the next version of that program actually starts quite soon, next month, early February. So with that, and with once again thanking everyone for their contributions and participations, most notably Fie and Floortje, I would like to close this webinar. So thank you all very much for joining. I hope you have enjoyed it as I have, and hope to see you in the future again. Maybe some of you in real life, but others maybe in the physical space. Bye, everyone.